Hey, thank you so much for joining me. I have a special guest, Adena Friedman, up on the stage. She is the chair of the board and the CEO of Nasdaq. It's such a pleasure to have you. She is often on the list of not just the most influential women in finance, but just the most influential. She is also a black belt in Taekwondo, so do not mess with her. But please welcome Adena. Adena, I have to ask, both you and Harvey are masters in martial arts.
Yeah, I've seen a video of him, and it's unbelievable. I would not want to mess with him on the street, I can assure you.
Okay. What is it about you Carlisle guys? And you have not fought Harvey.
For the record, I'm scared of him.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. So good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So I just wanted to start with a question I often ask CEOs, because you guys see things that the rest of us don't. Like, you know, right now we're in a very virtuous cycle in the economy and the markets. Valuations very high. Nasdaq stock, like Carlisle's, hit an all-time high, I think, today. So congrats on that. You know, there's a little bit of a warning sign flashing in the bond markets, but generally, you know, projections for growth, corporate earnings, very good. Do you think this incredible bull run can continue? Like, how do you see this playing out in the coming year or so?
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I do think first we should mention what is driving the growth in the prices. And we have, in the context of an interesting macroeconomic environment, but also, so you've got a lot of change happening in the macro environment. And we had a pretty rough year in 2022, right? So monetary policy changed very quickly from a free money environment to a high cost of capital environment, and that really shook investors. However, over the last 2 years, it's leveled off and now has started to come down, and that's obviously given investors a lot more confidence that they understand how to underwrite risk in the future of companies and future of earnings. But on this, you know, so that's been a little bit of a roller coaster for investors. But on the back, you know, the other side of it, the economic growth of the country has been pretty consistent and persistent and very resilient. So that's given, I think, more confidence, especially as we go into 2025, that investors are ready to underwrite more risk and take and hopefully, you know, invest in IPOs that are coming out. Also, the cost of capital is stabilized. Maybe it'll continue to go down, but we also have to recognize that we have a new administration with a growth agenda, and growth is good. So we, I think, have also that and the potential for significant changes in the regulatory policy, which could continue to lift up the ability for companies to drive growth in their businesses, drive earnings. And so I actually would say all of that portends to a healthy market environment. And then on top of that, you have the dawn of a new technological age.
I see.
And I do think that's important to recognize because it is the dawn, the very, very beginning of something quite different that will run through the corporate universe over the next 10 to 20 years in ways that we don't even understand yet, but will certainly drive productivity. And that also, I think, is starting to show up in how people are underwriting the future.
Mm-hmm. So if I were a retail investor, buy the Nasdaq.
Well, I mean, certainly the index has done well, and we're very proud of that. I can never pretend to know what's going to happen next. But I would look at all the ingredients. You've got a stable monetary policy, you've got a growth agenda within the administration, and you've got a technological age that could drive a lot of productivity. To me, those are all positives.
So what worries you about what's out there? What are the black swans you worry about the most?
So I think first we have to recognize we are in a global capital markets, we're in a global economy. We want to, I listened to what David and Harvey said, and I think that we all agree that we all want all boats to rise, right? We want Europe to be as successful as the US. We want the emerging economies to have huge success going forward. We are an interconnected market ecosystem, and we want to keep it that way, and we want to continue to have productive relationships around the world. And so I think as we continue to work together with the new administration, I think we'll just want to make sure that we continue to drive an agenda that grows multiple economies, because honestly, that will ultimately drive growth in the United States.
Gotcha. We'll probably dive into that topic. Let me just first tackle then the dawn of this age, as you're putting it. So are you seeing, I mean, this is driven by AI and other innovations. I think at this point we all know those are very important and they're filtering through companies. But what specifically do you envision coming? Like, is there like specific examples you could give, or especially tech and finance? Like, what are you seeing is going to happen in the coming years, besides, I'm assuming, a big kind of wave of super productivity?
Yeah. So I think there are a couple things I want to mention around that. But
Okay.
I'll start with what sounds boring but is actually quite interesting and important, which is looking at the regulatory apparatus that banks have to contend with. Basically over a 50-year period of time, the world has gotten about 6 times more complex. That's for every industry. But the world has also gotten 35 times more complicated, right? So meaning, as you think about how you deal with the complexity of the macroeconomic system and all the geopolitics and all the different, things that have happened around the world, the regulatory apparatus has just piled on and piled on, complicated rules and regulations that have driven a lot of people and process and systems that are not optimized, not efficient. So if you look at it specifically to our industry, there is an opportunity if you just allow for us to have a more, I would say, outcome-oriented regulatory environment, to sunset regulations that frankly are just way long on the books and probably don't have any real effect in the economy. And if you allow technology to be driven through to solve these problems in terms of managing this risk much more effectively, you could probably drive about 10 to 20% reduction just in the risk and compliance areas of the banks. That's $25 to $50 billion of incremental income to the banking sector. And that, to me, is a major unlock. And that's both a combination of smarter regulation combined with the unleashing of technologies that can be very effective. I personally think that's interesting. That's because I'm in the business. I'll give you another much more fun example. Can I give you more fun?
Yeah.
So I was talking, and it's a Davos moment. So I was talking to someone from one of the major AI companies yesterday, and I was talking to him about how we're using the Copilot tools around development, and we're becoming we're driving efficiency into our development processes with these tools. And he said, well, and I said, so he's describing the next version. And I said, okay, so that's going to make us more productive. He goes, no, it's that instead of, you're going to basically hire an engineer, an AI engineer, to really take on the process, to kind of complete the whole loop of product development. Now, we do very specialized technology, but even if that new technology is allowing our teams to be much more focused on the specialized work we do and less focused on the rote work we do, that could be massively exciting for us as well.
I see. Let's just dive into this topic then for a second. Do you see the incoming Trump administration good on cutting some of the regulations that will unleash growth, but do you worry in terms of regulatory cooperation across regions that potentially could get complicated given the kind of disputes that sometimes have arisen from tariffs and other trade agreements?
Yeah, I look at it a little differently, and I'll focus on our industry. I think that, first of all, there's been an enormous amount of new regulation that's come up in different countries, and it's not synchronous today. It's very discrete. And if you take Europe, for example, there's domestic regulation and regional regulation, multiple layers of regulation, even within a region in an economic bloc. And in the United States, the banks are subject to multiple regulators within the same country. So I think that there's an enormous amount of opportunity to drive efficiency without changing effectiveness, and actually potentially even improving effectiveness, driving towards outcomes as opposed to inputs, both here in Europe and in the United States. And I also think that if there is a real drive towards a smarter regulatory landscape, let's say in the U.S., which you can hear is a lot of words being said about that, I think it'll also wake up other countries to realize that they should be doing that too. We have a economic stable situation in Europe and in the United States, in Japan, and many, many of the countries around the world. And so it's time for us to maybe stop operating with the notion that there could be another shock to the system, instead saying, okay, now that we have a more stable environment, let's drive efficiency. And I actually think each country and each region can do that effectively and take down regulation in their own jurisdictions and have a lot of effectiveness.
Gotcha. Let me just go back to this topic of innovation. Now, I know Nasdaq provides huge services on anti-money laundering, financial crime. Are you seeing similar innovations by the bad actors too? I mean, is it like a innovation race? Like you use AI, they use AI to solve your AI, and it ends up being a martial arts fight?
Well, it always has been. I think it always will be, in fact. First of all, bad actors, they're not governed by regulators, and they're not governed by laws because they're bad actors.
Yeah,
So they're
sure.
breaking the laws. And so they just don't care that there might be regulation laws that hold them back from using technology. And they will use the technology to its fullest extent. That is something that we have to reconcile by saying, okay, well then those that are on the front lines of protecting the system have to have the same ability to use the technology to the fullest extent with regulatory oversight to make sure we are actually combating them effectively. And I think we use a lot of algorithmic AI and Bayesian models within the data lake that we have to support the banks today. We have 2,500 banks, and we have a network of banks that allow us to evaluate transactions across the banking system, and therefore we have massive amounts of data. We process about 1 billion transactions a week through our systems. About $10 trillion of assets are represented by the banks. And so we have an opportunity to solve the problem quite effectively the more we are able to use the latest technologies to do that. And then using the Gen AI also not only to gather information more efficiently to evaluate these potential bad actors, but also to help drive a lot more efficiency in writing the reporting to the regulators.
I see.
So it is a huge unlock, but we have to recognize that it is an arms race, and I think we have to see it that way and behave that way.
What's the most impressive or worrisome thing you've seen those bad actors use to break through these systems?
Well, it's not so much breaking through. I would look at it a little differently. We deal with fraudsters. That's one of the areas that we focus on. And they are using deepfakes in new ways that I think we have to recognize. Now, there's a lot of education we can give to consumers to help them understand what that really means. But, there's always going to be someone who is really an unfortunate victim of a very sophisticated deepfake. And now what that ends up happening, though, is that if they do it once and then they do it again and they do it again, we then start to see a pattern. And as the pattern develops, we can then catch them and be much more effective in rooting them out. But we have to find ways to make it so that we can stop them on the way in the door. And that's a new thing that we have to evaluate. But that's, I would say, the one that concerns me the most because the tech is so accessible and available. In terms of other things, I think we are constantly changing our models to watch the changes in behavior. So check fraud is another one. And we've actually are rolling out our next generation check fraud solution. Check fraud is way on the rise, and it's kind of interesting. Like, check fraud, okay, guys, this is a U.S. phenomenon. Checks are still very prevalent in the United States, and because I think we're getting more effective on the digital side, they're actually resorting back to the old ways of literally stealing checks out of the mail, washing them, and recreating them. And there's a very sophisticated technology being used around that, but we are actually launching a very sophisticated AI model to catch that more effectively. So we're excited about that.
Oh, that's interesting. So deepfakes in terms, it's Janet Yellen on TikTok saying send me this cash to this address?
Well, so it can be what we call business email compromise. So that means they could deepfake a CFO trying to say, please do this. So we call that business email compromise. It's probably more like business compromise. The other one would be, unfortunately, very sadly, they will deepfake your child saying that I've been arrested. Can you please send me money?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so just think about that also in terms of what pictures and videos you put online because they can be used to develop those. So that actually, to me, is the more prevalent and more concerning and frankly, the saddest. Those are the saddest stories.
Okay, don't put this on Facebook then. So, I just wanted to raise another part of innovation that I had just a couple fascinating conversations on with crypto. There's a lot of excitement in this community now. It feels like even, Trump's new regime is sort of accelerating this, but we've moved away from this era of kind of enforcement, and there were bad actors that were being caught and hauled off to jail in front of cameras. We're really moving into an era, it seems, of regulation of crypto, which will set the boundaries and the rules for it. I wanted to get your thoughts on this space. And also, one thing I was hearing at Davos is just this idea that companies could go public through these crypto exchanges. I know you provide services to these crypto exchanges. Are these I know it's a long way off, but are these many competitors on the horizon to Nasdaq?
Well, first, we do provide technology to the crypto exchange universe. So we provide trading technology, clearing, settlement. We provide technology to 130 markets around the world. So they are among our clients. And surveillance technology, too. So surveilling the market activity to make sure that they're being bound by laws and rules. And so I think that it's already...
Is that demand for those services going like this?
It has, and it's been great, actually. I think it's been a great collaboration with the crypto industry because they're all wanting to mature their platforms, mature their processes, mature their regulation, their regulatory compliance. And so that's been helpful to us. But I also would say, and we also then list crypto ETFs on our markets, which means that you can have an interest in crypto and express your interest through a regulated instrument, which is the ETF. And I think those have been incredibly successful. Now, I agree with you, though, that as the crypto markets look at the next era of their maturity, they're going from the Wild West to deep enforcement to rulemaking. Mm-hmm. And they are actually welcoming that rulemaking. I think we all welcome the rulemaking. Let's establish clear rules of the road to make it so that more of the financial ecosystem can participate in this new asset class, because a lot of them don't, because they don't have clear rules of the road. So I think everyone's looking for the rules of the road. I think that it's very important for those rules of the road to be grounded and founded on investor protection, just like our rules of the road are focused on investor protection, and making sure also that they have a lot of clarity in terms of the definition of a security and what we call the Howey test, which is a specific definition. So making sure that they have clarity on the definition of security versus a commodity versus a future or a forward, right? That actually is very important, because then it goes to your question of, can a crypto exchange launch an IPO? Well, an IPO, if you're a company and you're listing a security, then they have to become a securities exchange. And if they are a securities exchange, that's us, right? So if they want to become a securities exchange, then that is the world that they choose to live in. But if, having that definition very clearly defined is going to be important as part of the regulatory apparatus here.
Got it. Fascinating. So we had obviously a big event with Trump getting inaugurated. What do you make of Trump 2.0? Like, how is Nasdaq adjusting or not adjusting to it? And the companies that list on your exchange, do any of them come to you and say, how should we prepare for this? Like, what advice do you give?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think that there's a lot of excitement in the fact that we might have a robust capital raising environment. We might have a more normalized, I'll call M&A environment, that there could be a pro-growth agenda that could be very, lifting a lot of boats and lifting up the economy. So those are the things that people are excited about, and they want to understand how to engage the right way with the administration around those things. In terms of the risks that can come just from the geopolitical side, I think we're all trying to understand turning words into action and how that's going to work, and making sure that we also engage the right way with the administration to help them understand the unintended consequences of things they might be considering, just so that they go in with full knowledge as they're going in and doing that. And I would say this, the senior executives, I call them senior executives, that have been selected to be in the Trump administration are very experienced professional. On the economy side, if you look at the appointees for Treasury and Commerce, and for the Economic Council, for the key regulators, I would say they're extremely experienced. And so there will be, I think, very experienced people in those roles that we can engage with. And that's, I think, the goal is to make sure that we're doing that.
Is the White House open to what you're saying about creating a simpler regulatory environment across the world? Is that, it's... when coming here, you sense just the nervousness about the America First policy. But in conversations with those regulators, do you feel like they're very open to hearing what you have to say on that?
Well, I would say that they're looking for more, I call it smart regulation, not so much deregulation. They're probably the same. But think about it this way. As I said before, I do think they're open and willing to engage in how we can make regulation as effective or more effective with less effort, more efficiency, more productivity gains, and making sure we're stripping away rules. I mean, there are rules that have been on the books for 100 years. You can imagine those rules probably need to be at least re-examined. Right. So I think they're very open to that. I wouldn't say that they're looking at global regulation. They're looking at U.S. regulation because that's what they can govern, and that's where we'll be engaged with them.
Okay. Well, one thing we saw this past week is President Trump rolled back a number of DEI efforts within the federal workforce. Some companies have actually followed suit. I know in December the court sort of curbed what Nasdaq was doing on this front. How have you kind of thought about the strategy going forward on diversity inclusion? Like, what changes do you think need to be made on a company level or just on a broad level?
Yeah, so I can't speak for the whole community. I can speak for NASDAQ. And this has been actually a great conversation we've had the last couple of years too. As NASDAQ, we are a big believer that it's critical to have a high-performance company with a great culture that allows people to be themselves and attracts great diverse talent. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've been extremely focused on from the day that I became CEO. 8 years of developing a culture and a cultural norm that allows people to feel included, feel like they belong, promote, kind of really celebrates the fact that we have this great diverse talent. And then also making sure that we are becoming a natural aggregator of talent from a lot of different places so that we can drive diversity and continue to drive diversity into the organization through cultural norms. And we have great resource networks we've talked about before. We continue to be just as committed to that, and I think that it's actually been great for our performance, great for our business, and we will continue to do that. I think that over time, I also believe when I talk to other companies, they continue to voice the same, I would say, belief and the same desire to make sure that they continue to drive forward with what they've been doing. But there is a new, I would say, law of the land, and we all have to operate within that law of the land, and I think that everyone's just adjusting to that.
I see. It almost feels like, along with the new law, it's like a cultural shift that does it affect what you call things and the marketing of it? Does that have to adapt to the moment, even if the substance of the programs are fundamentally the same?
I think I've always said that whether it's ESG or whatever you want to call it, but it is an and, not an or. Like, you have to look at the fact that if you're going to have a great diverse workforce, it's also performance culture, it's also meritocracy, it's also driving performance, it's also making sure that you can be successful. And I think that's the case across all of those elements. And if we can just continue to do what we're doing and I don't know, I would say that let's not worry so much about the branding of it.
I see. So we have a little bit of time, so I want to ask just a couple other questions. Nasdaq stock hits an all-time high today. Should people buy it at this valuation? What's the reason to buy it?
So we're not quite at an all-time high.
Oh, okay.
A couple dollars off.
Not that any of us are checking. Yeah.
Maybe just a couple of times a day. But actually, I think that we have an enormous runway of growth in front of us. We're very, very excited. So we have 3 divisions at NASDAQ. We have our markets division, and that's a little less than 25% of our revenue is really in the trading of in our markets in the U.S. and Europe. They've been very vibrant markets. We've had a lot more participation across options and equities. We've had just great participation from a broader range of investors, and we're very excited about that, and that continues to be very healthy. We have our fintech division, and that's where our anti-financial crime suite, we have risk management and regulatory technology, as well as our exchange technology business. And now we are able to engage the entire financial ecosystem, central banks, exchanges, banks and brokers, to solve some of their biggest risk challenges, and also to drive capital markets. And so that is a very strategic and trusting relationship and partnership. And then we have very strong growth, and we talk about that as being at kind of a 10 to 14% grower over time. And then we also have our capital access platforms business. Our index business has been a phenomenal grower. We've had great investor analytics that we deliver, as well as our listings business and the services around that. That's been the one area that frankly has been a bit inhibited the last couple of years, the listings business. And so we're excited to see the opportunity for more companies to come out, so that also can be a contributor to our growth. But across the whole franchise, we feel great about our future, and we're excited about it.
And of those 3, is it the middle one that you mentioned that's going to grow the fastest?
Well, actually, we do not try to predict the growth of our trading business because it's just there are so many externalities that affect that. But it has been a nice steady grower for us over the last several years. In the fintech division, we give that general range of 10 to 14%, and in the capital access platforms, we say 5 to 8%. But within that, the index business has been an outsized grower for us.
Okay, great. I think I just have like a minute or two left, but I was standing back there with David Rubenstein, who you were the CFO of Carlyle. You're the CFO when it went public, right?
Yes, I was. Yeah, it was really it was terrific. It was a great time there.
And you and Harvey never trained together, right? It was just a total coincidence.
So I actually met Harvey when he was at Goldman Sachs.
I see. Okay.
And that's when he gave me a glimpse of a video when he was doing some incredible forms. I mean, he was truly, truly spectacular at Taekwondo. I don't know how much he's practicing today, but I also would say that I definitely would not want to come across him on a dark street.
We'll keep clear of all the Carlyle guys. I was talking to David, and he was saying, I said, Adena is next. I think you know her. And then his first remark is, she should be Treasury Secretary. So, how do you ever imagine a career beyond Nasdaq, going to the public sector, serving in that kind of capacity, or is it Nasdaq all the way for you?
I've been at I started at Nasdaq as an intern over 31 years ago.
Sure.
And I did take 3 years at Carlyle, and otherwise I've been at Nasdaq my whole career. It is truly the honor of my life to be the CEO of Nasdaq, and I love what we do. And we have a real impact on the world. I really mean that, in terms of helping driving economies and making them stronger and healthier. And so I feel very fulfilled here in the job I'm in. Okay, so government is probably not in the cards. I do love what I do. Well, listen, thanks so much for being here. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And, we're always really interested in hearing your outlook and what you have to say. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.